Officially call this meeting to order.
Right.
All right, now for the roll call attendance. Who is not here today? There's Joey, Aubrey's there, Lacey's there, Brandon, Greg. Is it Deanna? Is that right? Deanna, okay, Deanna, that's okay. And there's Zoe, Josh Hibbard's there, Eunice, McCoby, there's Jesse, and then there's Terry. And that is everyone I see so far.
And then I don't know if it's on the records or not, but yeah, Alejandro is not a committee member. So if he's on your list, Aubrey, sorry.
All right, so now that that's out of the way, on to the agenda approval. So I would like to entertain a motion to approve.
I move the agenda.
Okay, so Eunice motions. Any seconds?
Second.
Deanna seconds. Okay. And on to the approval minutes of the last meeting. Should I screen share those minutes or?
Yeah, make sure you vote on the approval of the agenda. We got for.
Oh, that's right. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So on to the vote. All in favor, give a signal of some sort.
Aye.
All right. All right. All oppose. So was that an opposition or was that to approve? So,
Zoe, are you voting yay or nay? The
Oh,
timing
sorry.
of
I was in approval.
it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And then any abstentions? All right. While we're on the subject, when we're voting, would you guys be okay with just doing the reactions? Or how is there a more efficient way to do that? Do you guys think?
The only problem with the reactions would be similar as if people don't turn them on or off fast enough. If there's we can always do it either just verbally, yay and nay, or we can also do it in the chat if people want to type yay or nay into that. Then it keeps it in the chat piece for those who are able to vote, and Aubrey can see. But I think the question is more for Aubrey: what would be the biggest, the most useful and the least challenging for you?
For me, really, at this point, I've stopped counting kind of individual votes.
Unanimous.
Everyone just kind of verbally says it, that works for me, or in the chat works.
So the chat, because then you can, before you close the meeting, save the chat and you get the whole thing
That's true.
as a text message. So then you have that record. Maybe that's better.
Yeah.
And in the chat, there's the question Jess brought up, which I don't know where we would set it, but the poll feature.
Yeah, so polls, I'll work on those. I think they have to be set up ahead of time.
That's
But
what I was
I'll work
wondering. I was trying to see where it would be on here, but.
I'll see what we could do for next week. I might be able to just make like a blanket poll that says yay, nay, or abstain, and then we can send it out every time there's a motion.
Sounds good. All right. And then I believe we're on to the approval of the last week's minutes. So I entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
All right, Jess motions. Any seconds?
Second.
Seconded by Brandon. Okay. And on to reports.
We got to vote on the minutes.
Oh, yes. All right. All right. So all in favor of approving the minutes, give a signal, I guess. And all oppose? Any abstentions? Sold. So, okay. Anything else before we go to reports? All right.
Can I just ask a question quickly? I don't disagree with the minutes, but in the minutes, there was a response to a question that I asked last week, which was the prioritization of base funding. And it was that it's not a state regulation, but it's CWU policy. Is that something that this committee has control over, or is that something that's set someplace else?
So I'll answer that, Terry. We have the ability to provide the recommendation up. It has to go through the University Policy Advisory Committee up through the cabinet. So the committee provides the recommendation up to PBAC through the CFO, and then they review and vote on that, and then it goes up to the UPAC committee on those. But so we have feedback on it. We don't have full control because it still has to go through the rest of the process.
Okay, so we're like the first step in that chain. So if we decide to cut funding or not do funding, it would still have to go through other layers. Again, apparently PBAC would have to approve that. And they could come back and say, no, we don't approve that. You have to go back and give them money. Is that kind of the way? I mean, and again, I'm just, this is strictly hypothetical, just so that I understand the process.
Yep. No, I mean, so the policy would be similar, but ends up at UPAC, and then the funding piece will go a similar route. But we'll talk about that more when we get into the way, because we're going to talk this quarter before we get into base funding about how those presentations are going to go, how we're going to review what deliberation will look like, and then the process for moving things up. And so we're going to have some conversation about the committee's priorities before we start seeing requests in those. But yes, we'll go into more detail on it.
All right, so anything else before we go to reports? All right, so I'll go first. As I was saying, I don't have anything to report on this week.
I don't have any updates that I can think of right now either.
I don't either.
Not really. I think some people are just wondering, with this being virtual and it still being a public meeting, just like where exactly on the S&A website can people find the link to get here?
So on the main services and activities page, there's like a big red button right in the middle that says join us for our next meeting. And
Okay.
they can just click on it to join.
Okay, cool. I just got a couple of those questions and just sent them to the website, so hopefully they found it.
Yeah.
And similarly, Brandon, for those who aren't able to attend, we do record the meetings. And so our training ones are a little bit different, but anyone who's not able to attend at the time can go to the website as well. And Aubrey has it set up so the most recent meeting is always on the main page. And then there's the link to the YouTube channel with all the past meetings as well.
All right, so were you gonna say something, Brandon?
Oh, I was just saying that was it for my report. So.
All right, sounds good. So anything else to report? Anything? Okay. So with that, I now open the public comment at this time. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Nope. All right. So with that, will we motion to go to new business?
No, we just moved to it at that point.
Okay.
Yep.
So on to new business. And I believe, Joey, I believe there was no new business for this meeting?
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Okay. And so on to old business then. The topic of the hour, supplemental budgets. And Brandon, I believe you were going to present something about that?
Yes. So I know last week I brought up the proposal of for supplementals that we only hear from base funded areas. And last week I knew I probably could have explained it a little bit better or in a clearer fashion. So this week I just decided to do like a super quick PowerPoint that just kind of lays out kind of my thinking and kind of addresses our current process, the process that I'm proposing, why I think it's beneficial to the students, and then I also address kind of two of our major concerns with it from last week, just kind of this week. So I just have a quick little PowerPoint that I will try to screen share without any quick mistakes, I guess. Let's see if this comes up. Do you all see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Christian, could you do me like the favor of just like watching like members, and if there's like any questions, could you just like interrupt me and like let me know?
Let me just reposition my screen and I will do that.
Yeah, I mean, we also got our advisors too, but
Mhm.
because I don't have everyone on my screen either, so I just wanted to have someone who's watching that.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. So moving on, so I just did an S&A supplemental proposition. This is from kind of like me as well as the ASU board. Just to kind of recap what I was suggesting. I was pretty much just saying for our supplementals this year, at least for the 2020-2021 academic year, is that we allow only base funded areas to request from supplemental funding from S&A. And so what I was kind of thinking is that that may only be for kind of like our emergencies or exceptions. And then what that would be, does anyone have any questions on kind of what I was proposing? I guess like language wise from there? No? Okay. So to kind of show what process I'm kind of hoping that we change from and just kind of order of operations, and that includes supplemental, is that last year and the years before that, what S&A kind of operated as was the first step was students created a funds request with another funding source in mind. Students couldn't come directly to S&A. They had to like kind of apply from other sources if they were able to. So say clubs and orgs, they usually had to request funding from either Funds Council or ESC before Lacey or anyone really kind of like deemed it to come up to S&A. So that right there already kind of shows that they had to go to one place just to get to another place that they were really trying to get to. The second one is that students had to wait to present to S&A. Like Lacey was saying last week, we had over 60 requests, and you could tell that from that you already have a large queue. So if you weren't quick on it, like beginning of the fall quarter, you were already on like a long wait list. So that was students waiting from 3 to 6 weeks just to present for 10 minutes on what they wanted funds for. And that leads to my another point is that students presented to S&A, and then that was followed by questions. And that was a total of 20 minutes allotted to each presentation. And Joey, correct me if I'm wrong, but we listened up to like 5 or 6 requests during a meeting at times.
Typically, I mean, kind of it's dependent on how many or what other business, but normally we try and keep it based on a 20-minute average for an hour and a half or 2 hours. So 5 to 6 potentially a meeting.
Yeah, and so we can already tell from usually we only meet for like about 2 hours max that already takes up a decent amount of our time if we were to fill it up for 6 presentations or so. And then with just proper bylaws, we usually question, and then the next week we discuss and we vote on it. So they're already waiting another week on top of their waiting time. And then if it's approved, how S&A works, Lacey can also help me, is that S&A is reimbursement only. So really these students come in, request for funds, and then they have to kind of take on the expenses of say travel, events, supplies with their own personal funds. And then after it's all said and done, they have receipts and proof of expenditure, then S&A reimburses it. But that's really only once it's approved throughout the whole process. So S&A is only an approval or a recommendation committee. So S&A recommends saying, yes, we passed, we want this supplemental to go. that goes to PBAC, which only meets every so often, so that slows it down. Then it goes to the Board of Trustees and ultimately the president. And that whole process is about 4 to 6 weeks. So as the process is right now, students are pretty much sitting on that debt of what it is, using their own personal funds for really, it could be over, I guess, maybe 2 months or something like that. And so for a student, that's pretty hard to financially bear for almost anyone. And so I just wanted to like put that out there. And then for us as a committee, we repeat this process 60 times to over 60 times annually on average. And this was just me using the last 2 years of how many requests we heard, and it averaged about 60.5 supplemental requests. And as Lacey was saying, the trend's only going up. So really, if we were to continue with this process, S&A is guaranteed really to hear over 60 supplementals. And then kind of calculating out how much time we truly spent on supplementals last year, we had less than 10 hours of our 40 meeting hours actually spent on our base funding. So that means after doing it, so last year we met for like a total of about 40 hours. 32 of those hours was spent on supplemental requests. And so putting that into more perspective, our whole budget, so base funded area, pretty much takes up $7.1 million. And we were spending 32 out of 40 hours on less than $40,000. So 7.1 million to less than 400K. And so I just wanted to point out, this is the system that we're operating in as is. And then my proposed process is what I deem to be less stressful on the students as well as our committee.
Brandon, before you jump into that, there was a question Terry brought up, and I don't know if you want to, we can touch on it, but because you mentioned the reimbursement only piece, and I know we had talked about how that had been slightly adjusted last year with student involvement to allow some piece. I don't know if you or Lacey want to answer Terry's question, but she said, wasn't the reimbursement process fixed last year so students don't have to front travel funds anymore?
Sure, and I mean, I can touch on it, especially a little bit, but then I'll have Lacey too. But this year, just knowing that we are also financially stressed, we usually had the student involvement office would take on that expense, and since they were a department, they were financially flexible to pretty much wait that time for it to get approved. But they also had to wait for that 4 to 6 weeks to make sure that it got fully approved before they were willing to use their own budget. So it's like students were using their personal funds, but some, I guess some were, but at the same time, going into this year, we can't really guarantee that other departments will be able to, I guess, front these costs for our students. And then I'll let Lacey kind of like wrap it up too, or touch on all the other stuff.
Well, I think Terry just messaged and said, thank you, I understand. And I just want to reiterate, I think Brandon did a great job. The S&A committee, those funds are reimbursement only, and we can actually reimburse students individually or departments. And student involvement last year was approved to be able to help assist in certain types of expenses that were allowed to be prepaid.
Yeah, and so like that, I was just reiterating, especially this year, and then having Jeff as my advisor, he was kind of like expressing like the financial stress of this year. So really, there is no guarantee that we do have a department to front these costs. So really, the burden more than the last couple of years will be on the students with the current process. And now moving on to what I'd say like the kind of our proposed process, and I'll just do the proposed process, and then I pretty much have all the justifications on the next slide. But really what it would be like, first one, base funded areas for requests supplemental. This year specifically, it'd be screened by Lacey as either exceptional or an emergency. And then step 2 would be our base funded areas presents if needed. Joey can help me out too, but last year, the board, the committee recommended to this year's committee that instead of presentations, we kind of had like filled out kind of like funding requests, and then off that we could assess I guess, in a vote from there, or if we did have extenuating questions, we could call them in to answer our questions. Am I right, Joey?
I think the recommendation for that was for travel specifically.
Oh,
If we had
okay.
travel requests, I think if it was other supplemental, it was still the intent of. So, and again, the committee can still choose it is not a requirement for supplemental funding for them to present, but we give them the ability within that. So the last year's committee, as some of you who were here recall, was really trying to find, because we had so many travel requests, what was the best way to streamline. And there's a few other recommendations they had for travel, but we can bring those up if that comes up, but I'll let you finish your proposal.
Mhm. Okay, and yeah, so I'll just say that's not exactly part of my proposal, but it's some of the language that we can factor into it if we want. And then the next is 1 week later, S&A votes on the request, and versus students, kind of what I was kind of going towards with Terry's, is that departments are still somewhat budget, I guess, like flexible in a way that they can go 4 to 6 weeks and wait for, you know, that money to be finally approved, where a student who's paying for their plane ticket, their lodging, their registration, it's a lot tougher when you're paying rent, you're paying your textbooks, you're paying for your tuition to go 4 to 6 weeks in a 10 to 12 week quarter without getting your money. And then I also on step 4 have our request is recommended up. And then 5, with doing that, we kind of limit our requests are less or they're more substantial, and it allows us, instead of hearing 60 plus student orgs or students, we pretty much have more time to conduct business about our base funded areas. So the more substantial part of S&A, and really what this year is going to be about, especially. And so with that, we could kind of pretty much really prioritize, you know, learning our financial reports. We don't just have to spend 1 week of training like we did. We can spend more time familiarizing ourselves with the reports, as well as the processes and the requests that come. And we can spend more time as students, as faculty, as staff, communicating with the student body, voicing our opinions, and understanding what the student needs are when we're going into a time to like review base funded services and activities and allocate funds to what the students really want, because we were out there understanding what these are the new needs that haven't been addressed in the past. And so with that, I kind of move to like my next slide, which is kind of why should we do it? Why should we move forward with only funding our base funded, or only hearing supplemental requests from our base funded areas? And what I was pointing about is that we spend majority of our time on less than 5% of our S&A budget. And that's because 76% of those requests are students or clubs, where we should kind of spend our time thinking about $28 million the next 4 years. So yes, we have 7 million this year, but we also think about the 3 years following, because we're thinking about the quadrennium and 4 years of financial funding that way. And I know 7 million is an assumption based on how much students we have each year, but I just kind of put in 7 million for 4 years. And why I say that is because, I mean, I guess I'll have Joey and Lacey to also talk on about how this wasn't really the intended funding model for S&A, but S&A isn't really the ones who should be deciding which students go to which conference, go like have what event, get what supplies. That really should be for our student funding organization. So what I'm thinking, Inter-Club Association, Equity and Services Council, Student Senate, the students should be deciding the student, like those type of things, whereas S&A is tasked to decide how much student resources should be devoted to each of those major areas, so that the students can really pretty much decide those type of things. And then Joey, Lacey, do you have anything to add more about how this wasn't really the intended purpose of S&A?
I mean, yeah, I can chime in there. So really and I think what Brandon's alluding to is the situation we found ourselves in the last few years was not the intent of the S&A fee back when we implemented it 20 plus years ago. And really, we didn't have ourselves in this situation until I'd say probably the last 10, 15 years. of that. The intent behind the S&A fee really is to provide funding that goes out to the base funding. So those areas that get them on that area, which is why we spend so much time allocating base funding, is the money we bring in is intended to go out to those services and activities. The way we ended up with supplemental, and you can look at this, and I appreciate you kind of giving the time frame on there, Brandon. As you look at the time frame on the current process that Brandon had, I mean, it is this drawn out, arduous process of multiple weeks and even months from when a proposal is submitted until the funds can be released, because it's not intended for these smaller requests, in all honesty. It is intended as a supplemental option for base funded units to come back. And this is why in the past the committee has funded things such as the Club Senate to provide funding for clubs to go on trips as base funding, because their approval process is much faster. They have the funds available, they go through their pieces internally with that, and it doesn't have to go all the way up through the administration. Because again, S&A is intended as the overarching umbrella of that. Where we ended up is the committee ended up pulling back money at the end of base funding cycles and bringing in money beyond what we were putting out for base funding. And so we had more money than was needed at the time, and so started offering up these supplemental pieces. And we had opportunities and things that came up that were extenuating situations or emergency situations that the committee was funding with those. And it did grow over time that the student travel that we were seeing with Club Senate and with others was growing beyond the capacity that they had their base funding. And for whatever reasons, the culture we had, instead of those groups coming and asking for more base funding, it was students coming directly to S&A to make their request. And so the committee spent last year talking about ways in which we can adjust that to really make sure that we're providing the appropriate funding to those agencies that are supposed to be handling student travel or student club programs and things like that. So the S&A committee itself really is the umbrella that's supposed to be focusing on the base funding, whatever we decide is the base funding, and focusing from there. And we have set up within that base funding the ability for clubs and organizations and students to come and request travel and those things. Is that kind of what you were referring to, Brandon?
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. And that's just what I'm saying, like really S&A should be diligent and think about maybe the next 4 years, think about this year on a base funding perspective, because these decisions have to happen this year. I mean, we are that end of the quadrennium committee where we do decide the allocation for the next 4 years, where the short run spending, like I was talking about, is like less than 5%, or really just these small like events, conferences, whatever, should be delegated down to the departments, like Joey was saying, and to our students to make those decisions. And so that's kind of what the next bullet point was, is that we give it to them, and we really work to support those departments that are there to help our students. And then really what I was also thinking, and this is for, I'm sure, all the students, like I ran my campaign on the third bullet point, which is putting the student money back into the student hands. And so it's a much more equitable and empowering student funding process when we put it back into clubs, we put it back into ESC, we give it back to Student Senate, we give it back to all the other student front funding sources. And so just to like help you all visually, we go from S&A with our 7 students and our 3 faculty staff members to over 100 diverse students stewarding their money. And so to me, that's a much more equitable solution for S&A and empowers our student leaders to engage with other students, steward their own resources, and really the best way to keep a student accountable is to have peer-to-peer accountability, which is what would be happening if it was an ICA, ESC, or Student Senate, or any other pretty much like funding group. And then with that, before I go into the next slide, which kind of like talks about some of like the, I guess, some concerns that people had when I was explaining it last week. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, Eunice.
So, I mean, I get it what you mean saying here that we not gonna be shooting person to what students need to do or not. But I also saying that, okay, we have a like ICA, like clubs, we have a student senators, we have also organizations too. But there's also students that are not member of the clubs. Or, I mean, I am saying that, I mean, I have a lot of friends, they are not member of any clubs, or they are not student senator, they are not even in the club, Shea Orgs. And these students also paying $240. I am paying too. I mean, I get it that you say that we need to focus about the $28 million, but the thing is, we shouldn't be that person that getting that right, the person that asks money from S&A, you know. This is the only part. I know, like you said, that it's gonna be more accessible, the money, but I don't see this as a more accessible, because also these people, like you mentioned about it, they also have a limitation too.
Yeah, and I definitely addressed that point because I remember you bringing it up last week. And so I do address that one, and I'll just kind of move ahead so I can get to that because that's my, I guess, in 2 slides. But I remember the first one that everyone kind of talked about because it seemed like we weren't spending S&A money if we went this way. And so I just kind of wanted to address that point, that is like, if we're not spending it, why pay for it? And I just wanted to like point out that if for S&A, I mean, we need it to pretty much have any service and activity for students pretty much in general, as well as it pays to complete our legal bond agreements. So for example, that's our student union, our rec center bonds, our S&A fee pays for that. And then also without it, again, we don't have any services. So that would be probably no student government, no student involvement department, so no campus activities, no CLCE, and so forth. And then what I was thinking for our supplemental funds is that we would be spending it the right way and in a much larger scale of an impact is what I'm thinking, because we give it to our base funded areas to present. And the best thing for us, because last year we did have kind of an equity or an ethical and kind of like equity issue when it came to requests, because especially with funding requests, they're very similar in many regards. And last year you would maybe approve one request, but we wouldn't approve one that is almost virtually the same. And for students that come question that, we really had no solid answer for it. So like there was no justification process. And so for us to delegate that down to our student clubs, that kind of gets rid of it, as well as if we're only to fund our base funded areas, it helps too, because we have historical data, financial reports. Lacey has all of it, how much they've requested in the past, how much they've been spending each year on exactly what type of things. They have documented student impact. And so like, especially like campus activities, like I brought up, they can give you how many people were there, what class they were, like perfect demographics that we should see as S&A, so we can actually see this is the impact that they have, and then it gives a justification to how much funds that they're asking for. Whereas when a student club came up to us or a student org, there wasn't any historical data because they're not base funded and they can't document the impact, nor moving to the next point, can we keep them accountable for that if they're going to say how much impact that really had. Whereas with the base funded area, they come back to us for a base funded report every year, as well as we have S&A who can keep them accountable for any, I guess, like issues, or if they're trying to request more funds. And so what I say, the best way for us to support our students, or for us to support our students better, is for backing these established departments. And by established departments, I mean hired professionals who have structure and documented processes that guarantee impact a large group of students versus a smaller impact for a lower amount of money. And so like what I'm saying here is that what Eunice was saying, like our students paying this money, we support our Office of International Studies and Programs, and then they can better support in like program for these students.
So I have a question for that. Okay, I know that you guys already paying the like Office of International, right? So you guys already have a budget for, I mean, I know that you guys paying the departments, you guys already decide that money, there's already budget for that. So why we are removing the budget from students? This is what I don't get it. So you guys already paying like OSIP, you guys already paying the other departments, you guys have a like budget for that, and you guys like have a different budget for that. So this is my question, why we are removing the budget that you guys put on the corner for the students? I mean, you don't saying that. I just don't get it. Like, are you gonna increase the money to that departments if we remove this? Are we gonna do that?
Yeah, I mean, really, ideally, that's what I was kind of saying is like, instead of students coming directly for this money, we put the money back into these departments who can actually support our students. And what I guess I'll get to in the next point is that then they have like the money, the resources to properly support our students. So I know OISP is like struggling to support their students in many ways because of financial restrictions. If they were to come up to ask for supplemental from us, not students, they could tell us these are the students that are like, we want to do these events to help support our students instead of say like the students coming directly to us, and they have pretty much this all documented out. And then we as S&A through base funding or through supplementals, we support them that way. And that way we have established departments with hired professionals that know how to work with these students or with this certain group of students. And then I guess from that we have a much larger impact than say 3 students come up for one event. If that kind of makes sense. Joey?
So, I mean, and I think that does make sense, Brad. I think if what I'm hearing correctly is really what you're saying, and I apologize for summarizing it the way I'm going to summarize it, but really you're recommending that, not that we don't provide the venue, S&A still provides the funding, but that S&A as a committee is not in the weeds with determining the funding based on the supplemental. So we would provide it to OISP, or we provide it to Club Senate, or those where students can go to request the funding for the same things they would before. But that again, S&A is not in the weeds of going through each of those requests. We allow those departments or those groups to go through those and provide them the funding that they need based on what they're seeing.
And I think, Eunice, are you kind of like saying, like, does it seem like we're taking away this money from the students? Like we're taking
This is what I understand since last week. Because I really don't want to seem the SNA get money from the students. Because like, I'm not talking about, like you said earlier, you give my example as though like, if we are not spending, why we paying? I don't saying that we should not pay. I think we should pay it because let's think about it, it's a business, you know, like if you don't pay something, there is no service. I get it. But I mean, from last week and this week until now, I am thinking like, you're just trying to funding money for the departments and not students. Because also my other concern is that how we gonna make sure that these departments that we gonna funding, they're gonna use the money for the students. Not, I mean, how we gonna, for sure, you know?
Yeah,
like I am working for international office. I'm not gonna lie about I love the work with them, but the things we have, like, you know, my issue that I am paying $200 for activities fee, but I also still paying money for the events. So I'm just saying that how we gonna make sure that departments are gonna use the money that we're gonna give them. Therefore, actually, I'm not talking about like organizations, because I know that like Orcs and ECC, they do good, and I'm talking about like the students out of this category, you know.
Yeah, and Lacey can touch on like the accountability side that we can actually have with base funded versus like our student coming up. And like Lacey, if you want to touch on it, but it's like every year or so they have to come up and report on what they've been spending on. And then that S&A can ask you, like, if they're not spending it to support the students, why do they have the funding? You know? And so, Lacey,
I think,
elaborate? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon, I think you kind of said it is, you know, they are required to financially report and also disclose, you know, successes and highlights, and, you know, kind of answer this question of what have they done for the students, you know, this past year. And they do that annually every single year through the 4-year cycle. And then, you know, and we've talked about the base funding cycle as well. So then they have to come back and kind of almost re-justify what that impact is. But at the end of the day, they should be describing, or we would know, describing the impact and the impact that they have on honestly the student experience.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I think maybe this is where we're still hung up, Eunice, is that it seems like we're taking away a resource, but I just want to say, like, we're not taking away a resource, but really we're just delegating it down to these departments and our student sources that can actually just immediately support them. So what we see right now is that our current student funding budgets is that our interclub association has 102K or 102,000, our ESC has 63,000. So our students do have money, but it's still like not necessarily enough, and that's why they come to S&A. So what I'm saying is that instead of them coming to S&A, we take supplementals and we support these groups. And by doing so, we do make student funds much more accessible to our students. And there will be other venues. So if they're not part of a club, they're not part of an org, and they're just a student, we have other ways to support them too. But really, if we do this and we put the resources in these groups, we make it much more accessible because ESC, ICA, any group has day of or next day transfer of funds. We don't have students bearing this cost for 2 months or over 2 months. As well, it does remove barriers and red tape, that what you think or what you were talking about. Is like instead of them having to request funds from Club Senate or ICA just to get to S&A, it's all there. The resources for them to properly support these students. OISP, the money's there to properly support their students. So students can go to this one place, immediate transfer of funds, and it's done. It's not an extraneous month, 2-month process to get $3,000. It could be a matter of a week or less to get that type of money if we were to hear supplementals in this way. And then I also want to say that CWU has the most student-facing funding sources in the state. And if we were to empower these, or just, I guess, reallocate resources to these venues, then we would be better off. I guess the students would be better off versus this I guess, old process. And so just to list them off, we have ICA, ESC, Student Senate, Career Services, OUR, which is undergrad and grad funding, ASCWU, and department sponsors. And so if that's just kind of what I'm pitching to you, instead of it's not taking away a resource, but really putting this resource into the students' hands and making it better for them. And then that's kind of like it. Does that kind of make more sense?
Look, I get it. Seriously, I know what you're trying to do because I came to your office last week and I talked about it. I really get it. But I also thinking about the students. This is the only I don't get it. Like the students not involved with any of them. Like students, like I know that are we gonna have a control that the departments that using that money is how do they weigh? Because I cannot give the guarantee that, for example, OSP is gonna spend that money all for the student success. Are we? Yes, sorry, Joseph.
Oh no, I was going to wait till you were done, Eunice, and answer your question.
Yeah, you can go.
I mean, so to answer that, it is really that what it would be is those units, and again, I don't know if this is where Brandon's moving, so I apologize if this is not, but that if OISP were to come in and request more funds, because they are base funded, so they come in and say that we want funds, that it would depend on what they're requesting, but that's where we as a committee would be asking them, and we could be intentional in you can use these funds only for programs or only for student sponsored things. I mean, we can be specific in allocating that out in which they then have to use it based on that. And I don't know if there's another response or if Lacey has more because I can't necessarily see everyone, but I know there's a few comments in the questions that I'll get to in a second.
Oh, well, I just wanted I answered Terry's question, but I'd like to kind of verbally talk about that for a second. So Brandon had mentioned department sponsorships. And so Terry was asking, does that mean that's an academic department? And I wanted to address that because there are quite a few S&A base funded departments that process things that we call sponsorships. That doesn't mean it can't be an academic department. We've had that in the past, but the majority of the sponsorships tend to be departments like campus activities, student involvement, and the number of departments actually under student involvement. So it's usually events or travel type of, awards for various different requests. Terry, did that help at all?
Yeah, because anytime I see department, I'm always thinking academic department. So, again, faculty member, sorry. So that, yeah, that answers that question. Thank you.
So I have, like, I don't know, several questions. I didn't write them down so I probably don't have them anymore. But I mean, you guys, you're referring to OSIP? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it was more of like as an example through it all. But
This is the Office International Student Programs, blah, blah, blah.
What but what is it? I'm sorry.
Office International Studies Programs. I think so. Yes, like
It's
that.
the International Studies Office. Great.
Okay. All right. Okay. So they get 10,000 a year. Anyway, so I'm looking at the list of base funding here. Right? And so you're talking about having all of these. I don't know how many there are there, but that's who then, I mean, the whole list, or are we talking just about a select few? Because you're kind of referring to those select few that really serve students. But I don't think, the pep band or Pulse or the Sarah Spurgeon Gallery, is that what we're talking about also, that now they have access to more supplemental? Or I mean, I guess they've always been able to ask for supplemental funding, but it seems like if we're trying to get the money to the students, we're going to be giving it to more specialized groups that already have it, and we're still excluding all of those students that don't really even know about it, that are paying in. I'm not really, I'm trying to grasp this. And is this just this year, or we're talking about this is going to be every year now going forward?
Well, I would like to highlight on the department situation, and then I'll let Brandon kind of take it home. But as far as I think what Brandon is trying to get at is basically delegating it down to ASCWU and having a funding source that can be, and he's actually saying multiple things. So increasing the funding that they have for funding requests, but then potentially adding an opportunity for students who don't necessarily fit in the categories that are established already. And so Brandon, is that correct? Please chime in. Okay.
yeah.
So as far as I understand it, it's not like across the board of the 55 base funded areas.
Yeah, and I mean, and then like arguably, I don't even know if it's really excluding students when really we're taking this money and we're putting in other programs that they have more accessibility to. So ASCWU, a lot of students know ASCWU over S&A. And if we were to have student funds there available for them for students, clubs, ORs, or any of these funding places or the departments, we're serving the whole student body in a much more accessible way and just university-wide instead of we're talking like a handful of people at one time.
And I guess that's the part I don't understand, how that's going to change what already exists, that it's, I mean, it doesn't make sense. I do like what you're saying though about us as a committee learning more about the base funding. And I mean, that is $7 million a year or something, right? That's a lot of money that's going out, that maybe we should be paying more attention to that. And I mean, and maybe not, maybe it doesn't make any difference, but I think that there's some good points there. I'm just concerned that, I mean, I think this move is that you need to look at the base funding, but maybe you're not, maybe we shouldn't say blanket, base funding. We're going to hand supplemental over to base funding units, that maybe you want to just say these 10 or identify that in some way. I just don't know. I mean, I'm confused.
Yeah, Jerry.
Well, and so two things, and I got to make sure I don't forget which one I was going to respond to, Greg, that you said there. One is I don't think, and again, Brandon hasn't made a motion yet, so I don't want to guess what he's going to say, but I'm trying to read between the lines. I think really what Brandon is looking like he's moving towards is not saying that all of the base funding are going to handle the supplemental. I think it's saying that the S&A committee will only hear supplemental requests coming from base funding units because we already have funding sources and processes available for student clubs and organizations within our base funding. So I think that's one part of it that's there. The other part, and I think this kind of touches on something else you're saying, Greg, is The problems we've had in the past and where we got to is that those groups like ESC didn't always have enough funding for the amount of requests that came in. And they had internally created procedures that capped the amount that they would give, which is where we would often see is the student would go to ESC, they'd get funded for X amount and then come to S&A. And I think that's where Brandon and ASCW, and I know they were working on this last year, were working on reviewing those procedures to be more, so if a student did go to ESC, they didn't have to go somewhere else if ESC funded them. They would be able to fund them that amount. And my guess is if we move with that sole motion that may be there, is we wouldn't necessarily be allocating more funding right now to the base funding units. What it would be is saying, okay, the expectation is that this is where it's going to go. So if ESC looks like they're going to be exhausting their $63,000, they can come to S&A to request more money. I mean, I think that's the part at the very beginning of the proposed process is where Lacey would get those requests from the base funding units and look to say, okay, does this meet the threshold? Because if you're sitting on a bunch of money, we're not going to have you come before S&A to ask for more money at that point.
Yeah,
But
and
again, is that kind of accurate, Brandon?
yeah, and that goes back to what we were saying, like that was the intended kind of like funding model of S&A, not where we are now. And what you're saying, Greg, how we spend almost all our time, 32 out of 40 meeting hours on supplementals versus kind of like our base funding. And so for us to hear fewer supplemental requests from places like ESC or any of the other base funded areas, that allows us to have more time, much more time to think about those more critical business items.
See, now, I mean, it would make sense to me if what we were trying to do and we just went ahead and identified, you know, ASCWU, those groups. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and maybe it's 4 of those that are actually distributing money. And we say, these are the 4 groups. We're going to hand over $300,000 extra to you every year. Here you go. Here's your budget. And this is where students go to apply for money to go on trips. I mean, if that, because they're already going there. I mean, I get it. They're going there. They're getting a little bit here. They're getting a little bit here. And then they're getting more from here. And just having it all go to one place, that makes sense. And having more students involved in where the money is going, that makes sense. But having Sarah Spurgeon Gallery now all of a sudden go, oh, we're going to send a lot more art and design students across the country on trips now because we can, makes no sense to me. Well, hey, wait, that's a good idea. No.
Well, and I think to touch on that, Greg, is the base funded units still have to operate in what their allocation is for. So great example, the Sarah Spurgeon Gallery is not funded currently for base funding to provide money for programs and trips for students. So they wouldn't be able to. We have some that do. And I think what you were jumping into is really later on the base funding, which again, these groups may come and may be requesting more money with this intent and purpose. But right now we're only looking at this year for how we want to do this year, because the base funding, again, ESC may have that exact model in mind of, hey, we would like to do this, and I don't want to jump into base funding, but I think those conversations have been circulating for about the last year of planning to try and reframe the process when we go into the next funding model. But right now we're only talking about this year.
Yeah.
I will say, like, the way Greg was thinking is really how we're going to be thinking this whole year when people come in for base funding requests, is that they're going to be asking for that, should be asking for that more money, and that's what we'll be doing, because, you know, instead of a little bit here, a little bit there, a lot over here, it's all going to be in one spot. It's
basically this
And
year,
Eunice,
with travel and freeze and purchasing and events, I mean, we can't have anything. There really isn't going to be many requests coming forward, I don't think, this year. But I think just picking up on Eunice's concern too, that if we, I think this could be a model moving forward, right? I mean, I thought that's what we were talking about a little bit, that makes sense. But if we can identify a handful, ESC, Club Senate, you know, maybe that the money goes to, but you don't want it all to go to clubs because there's a lot of students that aren't part of clubs that need it. So we identify what that process is that becomes more open and equitable to all the students. That's great, right? That would be fantastic.
And Eunice, I believe you had a question.
Yes. I mean, I just wanna like ask something. So last year, how many total you guys received total from students? Around, you say around 60, right? The reason I am asking,
Lacey's pulling it up right now. I think she gave the
let's
one
say
minute.
like I will just random number now, like let's say 15 students. Then why these people didn't go to SNA, or why they didn't go to councils, club council, or why they didn't go to ECC, why they came to SNA? So this is my question. They
So
could go.
primarily, oh,
Yeah, sorry.
sorry. So primarily what what you're referencing, they exhausted their fund cap in their funded areas. So let's just pick on an ESC org. They most likely either exhausted or used their allocation for either another event or trip. And so they didn't have another avenue, and they were guided to go to SNA because they couldn't get any more money from ESC. And so that kind of highlights, and there was a lot of the same story with club council as well.
Yeah.
And so it was them trying to be engaged with those, Brandon, it's called a funding cap, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did
This
that
is the
help
reason
at
I
all?
am asking, like, because like I remember one group last year, they get $1,000 from international office, but $1,000 is not enough. So they came to SNA to ask more money. So, I mean, I know that you guys want to make it department strong, but I am still like arguing that, I'm not arguing, but I'm just saying that this is not our job to remove the right from remove the supplemental. I mean, I just don't get it, but yeah, because I don't trust departments, to be honest.
And yeah, I mean, I guess that's one thing, but I mean, really, I would say it is our job to really properly allocate to these base funded departments, these student services and activities. That's S&A.
I mean, but the thing is, like, we cannot even control departments. I mean, you know that there's a 50 professional staff layoff because of the pandemic. I mean, also these departments cannot even keep their mentor in their department. How they gonna also help the students with the, I mean, I just saying that, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. Never mind.
That's, we don't know what we're talking. And that's just, Lacey, you can go.
I just wanted to say that I really do enjoy this discussion because I think there's so many good points on both sides of this. Is we don't want to change a model and forget out a large part of the university, our student body. But I do want to say that I think what Brandon is trying to do is create this change to break down some of the barriers and administrative processes that we have. And without, being able to change the model today, it is a really good conversation to say, how do we make this more accessible? And at the end of the day, I will say that as far as the S&A funds are concerned, it can be really difficult and a very long process for the students. And I see firsthand that impact that they have financially. And it is a concern, and it has been a concern. So whatever that solution is, I do think that we, with this group, we can get there and suggest whatever it is to better that student's experience by going through the process. So I just want to say I really enjoy it, and I see both sides of this equation.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess, Christian, with that, I guess I'll make a motion.
Okay, a motion for what
Okay,
exactly? What is your
so
exact motion?
I was just making sure that we can move on to that, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, for me,
Okay.
what I guess the solution to kind of make it more accessible and better the student experience is that I believe I motion for the supplemental budget this year is that we hear from base funding requests only, at least for just the 2020, 2021 year. And that's for, like, I guess, exceptions and emergencies. Joey, can you help me with the language?
So I think to clarify, and tell me if this is right, and again, because I know Aubrey's writing it down too. So you're motioning that the supplemental budget for the S&A fee committee this year really be earmarked for currently base funded units only to come forward for emergency, or I can't remember the other word you used.
I guess exception.
Yeah. So there's a motion on the table. Is there a second? So someone would have to second for us to discuss further.
I will second.
So are we essentially setting it at 0 and just saying we'll listen as it comes in? Like we're not setting an amount?
I don't think so. The motion isn't to set an amount yet, Jess. I think that may be the next part in a minute, but we can discuss that. Right now, the motion, and it's a discussion part, is to set supplemental for the S&A fee committee for this year to be only heard from currently base funded units. There is not a dollar figure associated yet. That may be a separate motion.
I was going to say, do we have to set a dollar figure then? Or
I'm staring at Lacey on here, but she doesn't know that I'm staring at her. So I'm going to verbally say that.
What I would say is think of this as two motions. Regardless of how this motion turns out, the next potential motion, hopefully down the road, would be suggesting a dollar figure.
And so is this the time now for discussion of the motion?
Yep.
Now
Yep.
that it's been seconded?
Yes.
Sorry, thank you. We need a committee parliamentarian. I think I like the strategy of this. I think the idea of pushing this, overall pushing the structure down closer to the students and not having the students have to go multiple times to multiple departments makes sense. It saves everybody time, effort, and energy. I'm a business professor. I'm all in favor of efficiency in general process. My biggest concern for this and doing it this way this year is that students, even though students aren't traveling, there's going to be virtual conferences. And so students will still want to access funds even if they're not actually traveling. I assume that the university would let the students spend money and let us fund money that way, because this is the student money, this is the university's money. Is that correct? So if
I'm looking at Lacey again to answer that one.
Well, it is the students' money. And so it is a little bit different than what some of the conversations are happening university-wide. But to clarify, in that process, the committee would have to vote yes, and ultimately the president releases the funds. So throughout the process. So at the end of the day, we wouldn't be able to sanction anything until the president agrees and releases the funds.
Okay, so technically he can say no. And again, since I don't know the process for all of this, I don't know if there's an appeal or how any of that else works. But I like the strategy of making it more efficient. My concern is that students are paying money in this year and that they get value out of it this year. And if we do this way, even though I don't think that the S&A procedure has been promoted enough so that everybody really knows base funding and supplemental, I don't think a lot of people really understand what that's going on. I'm concerned that if we change it to something else for 1 year, that they won't know how to do that. And I get that we could give all of these sponsoring departments, more money, but then how do we know, without having any procedures or discussions with these groups prior to that, how do we know that they're going to do that any more equitably than S&A was doing it? I think as somebody who sees PowerPoint presentations all the time, Brandon, it was a great PowerPoint presentation, logical, effective, and I get the strategy, and I'm actually in favor of this overall approach to this. I think that there are some devils in the details, and that's where my concern is.
I'd like to chime in to Terry's response specifically about you know, how do we do this with the departments? I think my suggestion, if this is something that the committee agrees on and would like to move forward, we should really get the experts involved, which would be Jeff Rosenberry, Michael Middleton, that's the executive director of student involvement, and the student, oh my goodness, the coordinator, student engagement coordinator. It's there, it's late in the night. I really think we should hear from them. They are ultimately the administrators that would be, you know, tasked with this in this manner. And so I just kind of think we should invite them to our next meeting.
Brandon, has there been any conversation from you or ASCW with student engagement or ESC or with the council about this potential model or change? Because I think Terry brings up a good point is, I mean, that's important to know if this is something that they're in favor of, if they're prepared for this on that end. But I guess I missed that if you had mentioned it. I apologize.
Yeah, and I mean, more of like that's what Terry Gray and they were saying, how this would be probably something we could keep doing in the future as well. So it's kind of a change in the bylaws as well as this year. But when I was talking to them, ESC and student engagement, so Michael, Jeff, and Jacob, that this year specifically, when we're concerned that there might not be enough funds, I mean, given that we have restrictions on travel and events, and that many people are just doing kind of online events that are kind of like low expenses, that all of those chairs of those budgets are confident that they'll have enough resources this year to get them through. However, that's the caveat saying because of these restrictions this year, but in the future, normal years, they're always like exhausted all the funds well before the end of the year. And so that's where I'm saying, like, if that's to happen, we have our base fund areas, we have Michael Middleton come up, we have Jacob who comes up, they request more funds, it's justified, they have data where our student clubs won't over like the past 4 or 5 years saying like, we used up all our money, we need more. And it's really justified and equitable in that sense for S&A. And then, or it just makes it more fair, I guess, our decisions saying like they're justified with data and facts. And then from there, they have more money, and then the students still just go directly there, get the money, easier for the students. When you're thinking about the students, this is all for the students, and that'll make it more accessible and I guess just like easier for them. And empowering the students, because then the students again are voting more on that money than just S&A.
And I believe Eunice, you had a question.
I just curious, can I make another motion while Brandon did the motion already?
No, for parliamentary procedure, we'd have to wait for this motion now. I mean, there's the ability to make an amendment to the motion. If it's making a slight change, that Brandon would have to agree with that. However, if it's a separate motion, you would want to wait until, once we're done with discussion, there'll be a vote. And then if the vote is no, then someone else would have to make a new motion.
So is it something we should consider? I guess I'm looking at this and still looking at the list of base funding of all the folks on here, and still thinking about the equity behind this and inclusivity, you know, that I think we want to make sure we represent. And so I still kind of go back to my thought about any of the student government groups. If we have Club Senate, right, clubs go there already. There's a process that they go to Club Senate and ask for money, I think. I'm not even familiar because I've never been to some of these other groups, but my understanding is that there's that. And does ESC also have a way that you can ask for funds? Students can ask for funds. So then that's open to individual students, right? So we want to kind of weigh out. It might be good to see how many clubs, what's the percentage of money we've been giving supplemental to clubs and what to individual students. Maybe that's not a basis to go off of, but that if we kind of establish this as, here's a couple of groups or orgs that are already doing this, and they've agreed with us to go ahead and take this on, are they going to come to us individually one at a time? We're still going to have the same thing, or are they going to come with us every couple of weeks and say, here S&A, we need 100,000 to go to these 20 students for these different reasons. And then we just say yeah or no. I'm still a little confused.
I just want to make clarification that only 7 organizations can ask money from the ECC, because you have to be organization, and there's a lot of processing for the being the organization. So there's only 7 organizations right now at campus we have, and it's only 7 organizations can request money from the S&A.
But I mean, before you're an org, you're a club, and you can get from ICA, and you can get it from all the other resources as well. And then I'm just gonna call the motion, Christian, because I don't know if we're really having the proper, like if we're discussing the motion anymore. So I think I'd call the vote.
All right.
So
But
if I call
I
the
think-
motion, then you do the vote. Yeah.
All right. But I think Lacey had a comment. She had her hand up. All right. That was a thumbs up. Okay. So you had a motion and then it was seconded, but what? Oh, okay. I see what's happening.
Aubrey
All right.
created a poll for us.
Nice. All right then.
What the
I
motion?
didn't. I don't have the vote. I can't vote.
I think we can say it here.
I see the results, but I can't vote.
I mean, I don't see the
Oh, maybe because I'm a host.
co-host.
Oh.
Brandon, you can, if you want to vote, I will.
I
Back up.
vote. Okay, I vote in favor.
Okay. So,
So that would be the full vote of our 9 voting members then, with Brandon's vote. of
But also
aye.
we have a guest, Makuba. I don't know if she voted though. Maybe Makuba is not a member, voting member, because it's also voting goes on her too.
That's a good point. So only
Oh,
Just want to
voting,
make sure.
yeah,
I just abstained.
okay.
okay.
Hers was an abstain one in there. So, I mean, so based on that, it would be four in favor, 3 opposed, and 2 abstained. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So with that, the motion passes. So now
Okay.
it's open as we're talking about supplemental, just to help at that point, is if there's any other discussion, if there is wanting to set an amount, as Jess had mentioned before, there would have to be a different motion or discussion. If not, then we would move on to the next item.
I want to make a motion to discuss this dollar figure next week. When
There's a
the-
motion to table the determining of a dollar figure for supplemental until next week from you.
Yes.
Got it. Does someone second?
I would second if I would second. And then I wanted to ask a question, Eunice. Did you want to, the reason you wanted to wait, did you want to hear from those
Also, I want to
organizations?
invite the Jeff. I want to invite. I mean, like you guys say, we should invite the professional people to talk about it.
Okay. Just
Like-
clarifying that. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I can make another motion to. I don't know. Do we need to make a motion to invite these people?
No.
Okay.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? No. All right.
So the motion is to table the discussion on the dollar amount for the supplemental this year, right?
Yep. Until
Yes.
next week. Does the poll have the ability to go again, Aubrey? Or is it a one-time poll? We're gonna find. Oh, there it goes.
All right.
And so if possible, only voting members vote, please.
And it won't let me vote twice. I don't get that.
I'm gonna say that the motion passes.
I would say yes, yeah. So we will make a point to reach out to Jeff and Michael and those to see, and I'm specifically looking at Brandon, if he can reach out to them as part of this, to see if they'd be willing to attend next week, if they can answer any questions and things with that.
And is there still room to discuss next week, limiting who's on that base funding list that possibly this might go to? Or is that beyond that now?
I mean, based on the motion that was just approved, technically any base funding unit can request supplemental. But again, it's going to be reviewed by Lacey beforehand on whether there's a need for it. And then they could technically come forward, but again, the committee, you all would still, you don't have to give them funding. So hypothetically, if the Sarah Spurgeon Art Gallery came forward wanting money to send students on trips, that does not mean you all are necessarily going to give that funding to that group, as your example, Greg.
Darn it.
So we don't have to, but if we did decide to do that, it might have this year.
We already voted on the motion, right? So
I
we
didn't
can't
catch
amend-
the end of what Terry said. It got echoey, so I wasn't sure. I don't know if that was just my end, so if someone else can answer, but otherwise I didn't catch the end of her question.
Well, I was trying to figure out, I'm sorry, I know nothing about parliamentary procedure or motions and all of this. This reminds me of trying to learn all of the verbs for curriculum committee. So please forgive me that I'm not. So I think Greg was asking if we could make a motion or an amendment to amend what was approved so that only certain areas could actually ask for supplemental funding, not everybody. Was that your question, Greg?
Well, I mean, I know we can't amend it now. It's passed, it's approved. I just, maybe we wanted to keep that on the table next week that we could. I just don't even know who that is, right? I don't understand enough about what these other groups do. I just still want to be sure that this is open to everybody.
Mm.
And Terry, it sounds like you're scuba diving or something. It's like this, like in an aquarium, or I'm not sure. So it's difficult, but.
So just to, I think, reiterate, Joey had mentioned it too. I think it would be best to put on the agenda next week, and hopefully Jeff Rosenberry is available. But I think it would be best to have Jeff Rosenberry come in because he actually oversees the majority of the funding that students have access to. There are other areas that are not under Jeff that do have funding as well. But I think if we can start with Jeff Rosenberry next week and then maybe build on that if need be. And he could probably do a presentation to kind of clear up some of these things, especially if students have never gone through the process. And if you're a faculty member, you've never gone through it as well, so.
Fantastic. Yes, let's get Jeff here.
All right, so with that, would we go to the next piece of old business, or is there anything else we can discuss before we move on to that?
And no need to apologize, Terry, or anyone else. These are the first meetings, and so this is us working through the parliamentary procedure stuff. And we're all virtual, which makes it harder to not talk over that. So yeah, Krishna, that normally because it say seeing no other discussion or because the motion's on there, we move on to the next item.
All right then. With that, we'll move on to S&A funding marketing.
And so I'll jump in on this. This is really just a continuation. I know there were questions as we were talking about some of the training pieces when we talk about the funding. And I know, Terry, you specifically brought some pieces up, and Greg had mentioned that why would we do the effort and stuff on this when we have publicity, who is S&A based funded, with some of those, just to provide some clarity to this. Like, we put information out as a committee, but really with this falling under student success, but really being student voice driven, that the majority of our marketing and information to make people aware of S&A really comes from ASCWU. And I can tell you that, and I'm going to put Brandon on the spot, but he's been here, so he's used to me putting him on the spot, is in the past that has specifically been our executive vice president because they automatically serve on S&A. And so I know over the last at least 3 years specifically, our executive VPs have been making some intentional efforts to try and get information out and word out about S&A through the S&A fairs that they've had, through information posted on the website and other venues. And so I don't know if Brandon wants to touch on any of that before we open it up more, but Brandon, like I said, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like my argument against that is that I feel like the numbers and the facts are undeniable. And then what we've seen when Lacey presented last week was that the number of requests keep going up every year. And it's not the same people requesting. I mean, every year could be they're asking for the same thing, but you do get more and more new groups every year, which increases the amount of funding requests that we get. So, I mean, it's hard to justify, I guess, like more events or spending our resources in that way when just how it is right now, it seems like we're already spending more money every year and there's more requests every year. So I think really, I mean, as it is, it's like it's getting self-promoted in a way. And with pretty much the motion that we passed a little bit ago, it seems hard to advertise it when we're supporting committee for our base funded areas that support our students. And so it'd be weird to, I guess, like advertise it out to the students now. And it didn't really have much of a success rate when we did events in the last years past, because it was just like, no matter what, we were getting more. And an event that we spend our S&A dollars on, or ASU or S&A dollars on for an event for 10 people to come to is, to me, it seems hard to justify. And we have numbers that are saying what we're doing now works, and with our procedure change, I don't know why we want. We could, but I don't know why, I guess.
Well, and I think what I'll open it up to, because, and I appreciate that, Brandon, is that if we do have ideas for things, I think those are stuff that we can absolutely put out there and push. I know that Brandon's predecessors have always struggled, as he said, is they'll put information out there, they'll put events to try and raise awareness, because again, we spend a lot of time on this, and so we know how important this committee can be and what types of options and access that it gives to students that most students are not aware of. But I know it has been a struggle for the exec VPs before, because when they'll put on programs or they'll put information out, it's normally the people who are already aware who will show up to support it. And it's more via word of mouth that we have seen it grow over the years. And so if there are strategies or things like that, I don't think it's a bad idea for us to float them around or to shoot them up within that. I do know, and I think where Brandon's coming, I think this year is going to be a little bit different focus on how we get that information, is probably less focused on the club side of it in the sense of supplemental funding, and more on making sure that there's awareness and information for people who might be seeking base funding, because we want to make sure people are aware of that opportunity and that exists. And so I know there's a lot of discussion back and forth. There's no motion, there's no necessarily need for a motion, but given that we were wrapping up the training, I did want to come back to that, because I know there was a number of different parts on that. Is that the committee itself, we can help support ideas and things through ASCWU, who really oversees that, or through Student Success, who it ultimately reports to work with publicity or others on things, but that the actual administration of the marketing is not necessarily, you all don't have to be responsible for that, as Greg kind of referenced last week, since we have units. Lacey?
So I wanted to add to this year it's probably not going to be as impactful because there's not as much flow in the CIRC, but last year CIRC Accounting really did a lot. They worked with publicity to really do a lot of like posters and information, and we even had a video to really talk about what S&A does. And part of that does highlight the S&A committee. So we had our S&A committee dates out there, times, and really kind of big picture how much money is in there. And I think that because all of the clubs have to come through CIRC Accounting. So we definitely had the clubs get involved in that manner. And so I guess my point is as a base funded area, we tried to do kind of our part, which is really primarily share the numbers, which might not always be helpful for everybody, but we will also continue that throughout the year because I think it is good to know, and it is good to be transparent about what happens at the S&A committee.
But with that, that was, again, I just put this on here as an old business item since it had been brought up in a couple different venues to give us the chance, one, to provide the perspective of where this really kind of sits, what's been done and those things. And again, so I can always put Brandon on the spot with different things. But I don't know if there's any questions, any discussion or anything on just funding, not the funding, but on the marketing and getting the word out and information.
How hard is it to send like an email blast to everyone? Like I know that Brandon can, I think, pretty easily send one out to all the clubs and orgs and whatnot, but as far as like just getting it to all, you know, faculty, admin, students, like is that really difficult to do? So that seems like an easy way to reach kind of everyone and cover all your bases, but I don't know how hard that is.
I will tell you that is very strictly monitored by public affairs. There's only certain individuals on campus who can even do that. And they monitor because they want to make sure that the student and employees aren't getting spammed with notifications. Just so, I mean, I totally get what you're saying, but that would have to be an approval and have it come from public affairs or one of the few people who has access to send it out to everyone on there. So again, Brandon can send it out to all the clubs and orgs and those types of things because we have them on mail lists. But to use the CW student or the CW faculty or the CW staff emails that go to all of those groups, you have to have specific permission from the administration.
Can we not get that permission?
I will say we can request it. I will say we're probably going to be told no. We could potentially request that someone else send it out for us on that. But I mean, the reason I'm saying they would likely say no is because they would count this as a solicitation and like they won't send out things about programs, things like that. We can put information in venues for students, like in the CW Connect app, we can put a post on there for students to see the information in there. But we can absolutely ask the question. I will tell you as someone who has previously had access, that was only via the exempt association, and only as the chair of that, I can only send it to the exempt employees. I'd have to go through the president's office to send anything campus wide. And the dean of students can send something to all students, but again, they monitor to make sure we're not spamming students. And so you have to go through an approval. And it looks like Lacey has a comment or question.
Well, I did want to just bring this up again because I think it's important to understand that I actually have to take everything that you guys do here. I have to present it to the President's Budget Advisory Committee. And when we're talking about how do we get people involved, I would push it back onto the CW community. There's quite a few deans that sit on PBAC, and I believe that they could share that down with the faculty. And we have Faculty Senate that sits on there. And Joey, I'm looking at you because I know that they've got a couple of people that sit on that from Faculty Senate. And so I think it would be good and to just keep sharing that information. And those are the people, the faculty and the staff, those are the people that have that direct communication. And so I get a lot of people to reach out to say, hey, this group, they want to do this thing. Do we know how? And that's usually how the conversations start. So I think if we can just build on that, and I'm more than willing to work with Brandon on kind of potentially, doing that this year virtually, which might be difficult since we're not walking through the circ and we don't see necessarily the same things. But I do think in the past 3 years, we've had an incline and people are starting to know that something is at least available.
So Central today only goes to staff and faculty, right? It doesn't go to students.
You're muted, Lacey.
I believe you said Central today, right, Greg?
Yeah, that email that comes out, is that just to faculty and staff?
I was under the impression it was for students as well, but I'm gonna look for our students. Do you guys get that? Okay. And we do post in Central today.
Okay, but I don't know how many people look at Central today. and so I'm on ADCO, so I probably could submit it to, ADCO, to all the chairs, academic chairs. Of course, they don't always all come either, but we could probably share that information about base funding. I mean, if we want to with them.
That wouldn't be a bad idea, Greg. Well, and to go to Lacey's point, so, and again, the membership may have changed, but the President's Budget Advisory Committee has 2 representatives from ADCO, 2 representatives from Faculty Senate, 2 of the 4 academic deans, the Dean of Students, a representative from the Classified Staff Association, a representative from the Exempt Employee Association, and a handful of staff in the BFA as well. So there's pretty good representation on that committee. And I think there's one from enrollment management now too, but I don't know. I'm guessing now. I know there was conversation, but I'm not on it anymore. So I'm looking at Lacey or Josh to answer that. Anyways, there's multiple people.
I'm looking at Josh because I believe the 4 deans are on the committee. Is that correct?
What committee?
PBAC.
PBAC?
Yeah.
It's, well, I guess.
One representative from enrollment management.
Yeah.
So, and I it's still the biggest probably problem is reaching just individual students and letting them know that this exists. And that's probably the most difficult because, half the students in my class don't open emails from me. So, I mean, I don't know how we're going to expect that from another kind of email blast. And I guess the other thing that like Brandon's concerned, like, why do we want to advertise it? We're already out of money. Or, I mean, not quite in those words. Sorry, Brandon. Just, but that is a concern, right? That, I mean, we weren't able to give enough money last year. It's kind of like, no more. Nobody else come and ask us. And I don't know. I mean, how do we want to discuss that this year? How do we address that? And as we're going into base funding, I guess, I mean, we're talking about putting it all into base funding, but yet, how do we get it from there? And do we really reevaluate all of those base funding units? It kind of seems like this grandfathered in thing, and maybe that's fine, and maybe that's always worked. So as we move forward, but I don't know, maybe there's a different way of looking at that, but I don't want to be the one to go there.
Well, and we're going to touch on the base funding things either next week or the week after. I have to look at my preset list of when we're going to discuss stuff. So we're going to touch on that and the stuff that was discussed a little bit last week. And then I think the other part really is, as we talk about the individual students, is especially for this year, I think given where we're kind of focused is for our committee, that's less a priority for the individual student, because if they're coming for a supplemental funding request, that's where ESC and the other acronyms that I can never remember all of them because they change. All the other funding councils are the ones who are spending time and effort via ASCW to get information out about that. I mean, similar how they put out like to how we got all of you students to join the committee, like join committees and here's information on that end. So I think some of those are areas where that can be more intentional with reaching out to get them directed to the right place.
When I think part of the issue is in the education of people here is there's 2 parts that I think are important that I haven't heard anybody address this far. One is that the students are transitional. So the students come in and leave. And so because of that, that's institutional knowledge. They learn all of this, but then they leave. And so part of it is the students telling, other students. And so I think that word of mouth is important. The other thing though is that in getting faculty and staff having knowledge of this and the process is important because we stay. And so we can then, when students are saying, we want to do this, how do we do this? They're more likely to go to their faculty advisor. They're more likely to go to an instructor or somebody they know. And if the instructors don't know, and so I can say as a faculty member, but I'm a tenure track, there's a lot of NTTs, and more of our faculty are NTTs. And honestly, they are the least informed. probably people, and so students go to the NTTs who are their favorite professor or whatever. We want to do this. How do we? Like, I don't know. We don't have any money for that. So I think that's one piece of it, is that making sure that the people who are here beyond the students helps, because there's that communication piece. And I don't think that a lot of faculty know. I didn't even know that this existed, and I was a faculty advisor for a club, and I read all of my email. I really do. So yeah, no, I didn't know. The other piece of this is how much money is available. I mean, that people are getting $60,000 a year in base funding, and the fact that base funding only happens every 4 years, that right there is a huge barrier. We're only doing base funding every 4 years. That means this year is super important. Just because I knew, I did it to my college and said, look, guys, this is a base funding year. I'm just telling you, because when I look at the distribution of funds, I want to make sure that we're getting equity. I don't see a lot of funding requests coming from COTS and from SEPs or from the College of Business. And so I want to make sure that we are hitting all of these areas, making sure that everybody knows. If they don't want to apply, that's okay. But part of this is, with the base funding in particular, and then if we're going to, on top of this, only allow previously base funded groups to now ask for supplemental money, this means that makes that even more lopsided, and that is one of my concerns in this moving forward. So those are really the two issues that I have with the marketing, is that people really know what it means, because again, the devil is in the details.
I just want to say additional things. Like for international students, they don't know anything about S&A. I didn't even know until, thanks to Brandon and Mikael for letting me know last year about it. I mean, also international students, I had to reach out. I work for international office. So what I do, I email them twice a day about the events, and I see the people show up the events. Like, for example, I have an event at 9 p.m. today. I hope 5 people are gonna show up. I feel like saying that, emailing maybe you, for example, I work for international, so I have international students email, so I can advertise, but I also would like to see Joseph or Lacey, maybe, sorry, I cannot pronounce your name because of Aubrey. Sorry. So, and maybe, for international student orientation, or maybe one of the events we can welcome you guys to talk about it, because I really would like to target the international students, know about the S&A, even though they don't care much, but they need to care about it. I don't know if it's okay that if you ask you guys show up, are you guys gonna be able to come in?
I think, and I'm going to speak for everyone, I know I would love any opportunity to come and talk to our students. So I'm volunteering the others as well. So anytime we can to get out. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I'm also available for any one-on-one meetings. I know that isn't always helpful too, but I am more than happy to I've sat down with faculty and staff and students just to kind of help navigate, because sometimes it's not as simple as a trip, or as simple as an event. Last year there were students that came together and wanted to host a conference, which is crazy awesome, but also so many different layers and so many different departments have to come in. So I love to be able to connect with that. And so if you do have students that you guys are talking to and reaching out to, just know that they can always come and ask me questions. Even if it seems like it isn't relevant to S&A, I can try to help at least navigate to what area they might need to go to.
I was so happy. I see the international students show up the meeting, Makube. So I was like, okay, good job. Thank you for coming. So, because I mentioned in the staff meeting, I believe that in our staff meetings, we can talk about it. We can train each other, then we can train the students, because students, I think students have a direct communication with the students. So maybe we can educate like student leaders who works for student government, for international office. Maybe we can try to arrange like a meeting or maybe something that all student leader, if they're educated by you guys, I think it's gonna be very good to reach out to students about the S&A.
All right. And so unless there's anything else to be said, I would like to move on to other business. Or we don't need a motion for that, do we? No, we don't. All right.
Nope,
So
you're good.
with that, other business as being communications received.
I have not received any communications.
I have not either.
Nope.
Nope. Neither have I. All right, so with that, I'll move on to the second call of public comments. Any questions, comments, or concerns, please make yourself known.
I just want to say I appreciate you all going through the training and having these discussions. I know some of these are longer meetings, but the conversations and what you all are discussing is important. And so I appreciate you all taking the time to go through and be thoughtful in it and not rushing through things. And again, it's likely that our other meetings will be a little bit shorter for this quarter. There's no guarantee on that, but we'll have a few topic items for us to chat and discuss about. I know I just jinxed it, so you can blame that on me. But I do appreciate you all spending the time and making sure you're sharing your voices, especially on the student side of it, because this is your all's money and wanting to make sure you all have a say in what we do with it and how we set and structure things, because that's the most important part. So thank you all.
I just want to say thank you to Brandon for working on the presentation. I know like what he tries to do is good thing for us, but in my position, I just think maybe over too much, but I want to say thank you to Brandon. Also, student government has a lot of candies. I took it so you guys can eat it from Brandon office. I will give it to him.
And I too would just like to say I appreciate we have 5 new members here, and this is huge, and these conversations, I can't imagine stepping into this committee on Zoom without like being in a room and around a table with everybody and paper agendas and things that we're talking about, and this has got to be so difficult. And stick around, it does get better. But it's, yeah, thank you and welcome.
I have a quick question for Brandon. When we gonna fill the new seat, the people, because like, I mean, I think Alejandra is not gonna able to make it because of the classes, because I feel like it's gonna affect the voting too. So when we gonna fill the seats?
Yeah, I mean, I just sent up a request to Dean Gregg. So the process is I recommend, and then it goes to Triple G, who will approve it for this committee at least. And if there's a university one, it goes through Triple G and then the president. So it's a multiple week process, but we have a name that I recommended up. And then Alejandro's position, I figured that out for sure last week. So we're looking for another one.
Thank you.
Student who wants to talk about money specifically.
Any more comments? All right, so Brandon, was that a hand raise or was that just you fixing your hat?
Just adjusting my hat.
Okay. So seeing no more comments, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I want to move. Sorry, you can go, JC.
I
Yes,
just either way, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
all right,
Oh, and the poll's up.
poll is up.
Oh, I mistakenly say nay. Sorry, I want to say aye.
We know you just want the meeting to keep going, Eunice.
I just want to go home.
Yeah.
All right, looks like the meeting is adjourned. All right,
Have a great evening all. See you next week.
yeah, thanks everyone, see ya.
All right.